Arthur's wife texted him, "I just inherited $12 million. Pack your things and get out of my house." When he walked through the front door, the divorce papers were already waiting on the mahogany table. He didn't scream, nor did he beg. He simply pulled out his fountain pen and signed them with a steady hand. "Good luck," he thought, his expression unreadable, "but you've completely forgotten about that." Arthur never imagined that 45 years of marriage could be dismantled by a single text message, yet there it was, glowing on his screen at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just as he was meticulously pruning the prize-winning roses in their backyard. His hand had frozen mid-snip, shears hovering over a delicate bloom, the same garden he had cultivated for her enjoyment for decades. This was the same woman who had vowed to love him in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. Apparently, richer came with a completely different set of terms and conditions. The ink was barely dry on the signature line when the heavy oak front door crashed open, the sound reverberating through the silent house like a gunshot. Arthur placed the cap back on his fountain pen with a precise, deliberate click, refusing to flinch. He did not turn around immediately. He took a moment to align the edges of the divorce papers with the corner of the table, ensuring they were perfectly parallel. Only then did he pivot on his heel to face the intruders. Brenda stood in the entryway, breathless and flushed, but not from exertion. She was practically vibrating with a manic energy Arthur had never seen in her before. Gone were her sensible cardigans and orthopedic shoes. In their place, she wore a gaudy, bright red designer dress that was perhaps a size too tight and heels that made her wobble slightly on the hardwood floor. But she was not alone. Looping an arm possessively through hers was Julian, her personal trainer. At 42 years old, Julian was a wall of bronzed muscle and bleached teeth, wearing a tight V-neck shirt that seemed desperate to escape his torso. Brenda marched into the room, her eyes darting from Arthur to the table. She seemed to be bracing herself for a scream, a plead, or a thrown vase. When her gaze landed on the signed papers, her mouth fell open slightly. The wind seemed to go out of her sails. She had wanted a fight. She had prepared for a war, and Arthur had given her a surrender so swift it bordered on insult. "You signed them," she said, her voice shrill. She walked to the table and snatched up the documents, scanning the signature as if checking for a trap. "You actually just signed them." "I assumed that was what you wanted," Arthur said. His voice was level, devoid of any inflection. It was the same tone he used when explaining a tax audit to a client. Brenda looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. She seemed disappointed. "You have nothing to say? After 45 years? I tell you I am leaving you, that I have millions of dollars now, and you just sign your name and walk away. You really are a coward, Arthur. A boring, spineless old man." Julian let out a short, barking laugh. He stepped further into the room, looking around with a sneer of exaggerated distaste. He picked up a porcelain figurine from the mantel, tossed it in the air, and caught it. "So this is the castle, huh?" Julian asked, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It smells like a library in here. Old people smell. We are going to have to get this place, babe. Rip out all this dark wood. Put in some glass, some light. Make it look like someone actually lives here." Arthur watched Julian's hand on the figurine. It was a latro piece Arthur had bought Brenda for their 20th anniversary. He felt a flicker of anger deep in his chest, a small flame, but he suffocated it instantly with the cold weight of his logic. Reacting now would cost him. Emotion was a liability. "The house is yours to do with as you please," Arthur said, turning his back on them. "I will gather my essentials and leave." He walked past them toward his study, the sanctuary where he had spent thousands of hours balancing the family budget, planning their retirement, and ensuring Brenda never had to worry about a single bill. He could feel their eyes on his back. "Don't think you are taking anything valuable," Brenda shouted after him. "The furniture, the art, the silver, it stays. That is all part of the house." Arthur did not reply. He entered the study and closed the doors softly, granting himself 30 seconds of silence. He breathed in the scent of old paper and lemon polish. He did not go to the safe. He did not go to the cash box. He went straight to his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and removed a small, black external hard drive. It contained 45 years of digitized financial records, every tax return, every bank statement, and every receipt since 1980. He slipped it into his pocket. Then, he reached for the bookshelf and pulled down a nondescript navy blue folder. It looked boring, the kind of folder one would bypass without a second thought. Inside were the original trust documents from 1998, papers that Brenda had signed without reading because she had been too busy crying over her father's bankruptcy. He tucked the folder under his arm. That was all he needed. He had packed a small suitcase earlier that morning, acting on an intuition that had been nagging him for weeks. He was a forensic accountant. He noticed patterns, and Brenda's behavior had been a pattern of deception for months. The text message had just been the final data point. When Arthur emerged from the study, Brenda and Julian were already in the kitchen, opening a bottle of champagne. The cork popped loudly, followed by their raucous laughter. They were celebrating his eviction in the home he had paid for. Arthur walked to the front door, his small suitcase in hand, the blue folder tucked tight against his ribs. "Hey, old-timer," Julian called out, raising his glass. "Don't forget to leave the keys." Arthur stopped. He placed his house keys on the small console table by the door. He looked at the pair one last time. Brenda was leaning against the granite counter, giggling as Julian whispered something in her ear. She looked ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up, but she also looked cruel. Arthur opened the door and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The heat hit him, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the house. He walked down the driveway to his 2012 Ford Taurus. The paint was fading on the hood, and it had a small dent in the rear bumper, but the engine was sound. Behind him, the front door opened again. Brenda and Julian stepped out onto the porch to watch him go. It was a final power move, a desire to see him defeated and retreating. "Look at that piece of junk," Julian shouted, pointing at the Ford. "With the money you are saving on him, babe, we can buy you a real car tomorrow. Maybe a Porsche." Brenda laughed, the sound sharp and jagged. "Go on, Arthur. Go find a cheap motel. Maybe you can find someone who likes clipping coupons as much as you do." Arthur placed his suitcase in the trunk. He placed the blue folder on the passenger seat, treating it with more care than he would a newborn. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. It rumbled to life with a steady, reliable hum. He did not look back at the house. He did not look at the rose garden he had left half-pruned. He checked his mirrors, shifted into reverse, and backed out of the driveway with slow, controlled precision. As he shifted into drive and pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of them in the rearview mirror. They were toasting each other, silhouetted against the grand entrance of the home. Arthur adjusted his glasses. His face remained a mask of indifference, but in his mind, he was already opening a new spreadsheet. The columns were labeled, the rows were ready. The audit had begun. The Starlight Motel was located on the frayed edge of town where the manicured lawns of the suburbs gave way to industrial warehouses and cracked pavement. Arthur pulled his Ford Taurus into a parking space beneath a flickering neon sign that buzzed with the persistence of a dying insect. He turned off the ignition and sat in the silence for a long moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. It was a stark contrast to the climate-controlled silence of the garage he had parked in for 4 decades, but Arthur did not complain. He simply noted the variable change in his environment and adjusted his expectations accordingly. He checked into room 12, a ground-floor unit that smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and aggressive lemon cleaner. The carpet was a kaleidoscope of brown and orange geometric shapes that had not been fashionable since the 1970s. Arthur placed his small suitcase on the luggage rack and set the blue folder and the black hard drive on the small, scarred round table by the window. He took off his suit jacket, folded it precisely, and hung it in the open closet. Then he loosened his tie. For the first time since the text message arrived, Arthur sat down on the edge of the sagging mattress and allowed himself to feel. The image of Brenda in that red dress, clinging to the arm of a man half her age, flashed behind his eyes like a strobe light. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. It was not just the loss of the marriage, it was the erasure of history. He closed his eyes and traveled back 45 years. He remembered the night Brenda's father, a proud but reckless man, had sat at their kitchen table with his head in his hands, weeping openly. The family business was collapsing under the weight of mismanagement and hidden debts. Creditors were calling at all hours. Brenda, young and terrified, had looked at Arthur as if he were the only thing standing between her and the abyss. Arthur had stepped in. He had not slept for 3 days. He had gone through every receipt, negotiated with every vendor, and restructured the entire operation. He had used his own meager savings to pay off the most aggressive loan sharks. He had saved them. He had been the rock, the fixer, the man who made the terrifying numbers behave. Brenda had told him then that she loved his mind, that she loved his stability. She had promised that they were a team, that she would never forget what he did. Arthur opened his eyes. The cheap motel room came back into focus. She had forgotten. Or perhaps she had simply decided that his utility had expired. He was an artifact of a time she wanted to erase, a reminder of when she was poor and desperate. Now that she was rich, she wanted an accessory, not a partner. He stood up and walked to the small table. He was done feeling. The time for sentimentality had passed the moment she let Julian insult him in his own hallway. Now was the time for accounting. In his profession, Arthur knew that chaos was simply a pattern waiting to be decoded. Brenda had introduced chaos into his life, and he intended to organize it, column by column, until the sum was 0. He opened his laptop and waited for the sluggish motel Wi-Fi to connect. The screen glowed blue in the dim room, illuminating his face. He navigated to the bank's portal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Most people assumed that security was about complex algorithms and encryption, but Arthur knew that the weakest link in any system was always the human element. Brenda was lazy. She had always been lazy with details, preferring to let Arthur handle the passwords and the pins. When she did create one, she used the path of least resistance. He typed in her username, which he knew by heart. Then, he tabbed to the password field. He typed the name of her first childhood dog followed by the year she was born. It was the same password she used for her email, her social media, and her online shopping accounts. He had warned her a dozen times to change it, to use a random generator, to enable 2-factor authentication. She had always laughed and waved him off, calling him paranoid. Now, her laziness was his key. He pressed enter. The loading circle spun for 3 agonizing seconds. Arthur held his breath, half expecting a red error message, half expecting that Julian might have been smart enough to force her to change it. The screen flashed, and the dashboard of the joint bank account appeared. Arthur let out a slow, controlled exhale. He was in. He adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the screen. The numbers on the screen were staggering, far larger than anything that had ever been in this account before. The balance was swollen, bloated with the influx of the inheritance. But Arthur was not looking at the total. He was looking at the transaction history. He needed to see the flow. Money left a trail, like a slug moving across concrete. It glistened if he knew where to look. He clicked on the activity tab for the last 48 hours. His eyes scanned the rows of data, his brain processing the information faster than most computers. He saw the deposit. $12 million. A wire transfer from the estate of Philip Vance. It had landed in their joint checking account 2 days ago. Arthur frowned. Why had she put it there? The lawyers would have advised her to open a separate trust account immediately to keep the inheritance distinct from marital assets. That was estate planning 101. Then he saw it. A series of smaller transactions leading up to the deposit. A payment to a luxury car dealership. A $5,000 charge at a boutique hotel downtown. A transfer to pay off a credit card that Arthur did not recognize. She had deposited the money into the joint account because the joint account had the highest transfer limits and was linked to her platinum status. She wanted instant access. She wanted to spend the money the second it touched her hands. She had used the marital account as a conduit for her greed, likely intending to move the bulk of it out later. But in the world of forensic accounting, intent did not matter. Actions mattered. The moment that inheritance money touched the joint account, a chemical reaction occurred in the eyes of the law. It was no longer separate property. It was community property. She had contaminated the entire sum. Arthur pulled the blue folder closer to him. He opened it and smoothed out the yellow document from 1998. Then he looked back at the screen. He took a screenshot of the transaction history. Then another. He downloaded the monthly statements for the last year. He worked with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He was simply gathering the ammunition for a war she did not even realize had begun. She thought she had kicked a helpless old man out of her house. She did not realize she had just handed the auditor the keys to the vault. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, sounding surprised. "Arthur. Is that you?" "Hello, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice steady. "I apologize for calling so late. I have a situation that requires your immediate attention. I need to retain your services." There was a pause on the line. Sarah Jenkins had known Arthur since she was a child. She knew him as the quiet man who brought potato salad to neighborhood barbecues. "Of course, Arthur," Sarah said, her tone shifting to professional concern. "What happened? Is everything all right?" "No," Arthur said, looking at the glowing numbers on his screen. "But it will be. I need you to meet me tomorrow morning. I have a file I need to show you." "And Sarah?" "Yes. Prepare yourself. I am going to need you to be very aggressive." Arthur hung up the phone. He looked at the screen one last time, at the millions of dollars that Brenda thought were hers. He closed the laptop. The neon sign outside buzzed again, a harsh, electric sound in the night. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, pulling the thin curtains shut. He was ready. The ledger was open, and he was about to start making entries. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only illumination in the cramped motel room, casting deep shadows across Arthur's face as he leaned in, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. He was no longer a heartbroken husband, he was a forensic auditor at a crime scene, and the blood on the floor was digital. He focused on the timeline of the past 48 hours. It was a chaotic spray of transactions, reckless and impulsive, but amidst the noise, Arthur spotted the fatal error. It was glaringly obvious to a trained eye, like a red flare in a night sky. The $12 million wire transfer from the estate had hit their joint checking account at 9:30 in the morning the previous day. Arthur traced the metadata. Why had she not opened a separate trust account? Why expose the inheritance to a marital asset? He clicked on the Messages and Alerts tab of the banking portal. There it was. A notification time stamped at 10:15 in the morning, less than an hour after the deposit. Asterisk, congratulations, Mrs. Vance. Based on your new average daily balance, you have been instantly upgraded to our Diamond Private Client tier. Your Platinum credit card limit has been increased to $200,000, asterisk. Arthur let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Vanity. It was pure, unadulterated vanity. Brenda could not wait for the lawyers to set up a proper, segregated account structure. She wanted the status symbol immediately. She wanted the bank manager to call her. She wanted the black card with the heavy metal weight in her purse. To get that instant validation, she had dumped the inheritance into the account with the longest history, their joint account. By doing so, she had mixed the separate property of the inheritance with the community property of their marriage. She had poured her expensive wine into their shared water bucket. Arthur moved his cursor down the ledger. He needed to see if she had merely parked the money there, or if she had begun to spend it. The law was nuanced, but spending was where the trap snapped shut. He found it. Transaction ID 9942. Date, yesterday. Amount, $135,000. Payee, Autobahn Luxury Imports. Arthur opened a new browser tab and searched for the dealership. It was a high-end showroom specializing in German sports cars. He remembered Julian's taunt in the driveway about buying a Porsche. It had not been an idle threat, it had been a statement of fact. Brenda had bought her lover a car using funds that were technically still co-mingled with Arthur's Social Security checks and their grocery budget. He continued to scroll. Transaction ID 9945. Amount $12,000. Payee, the Golden Hour Resort. She had booked the suite. A non-refundable deposit for a 2-week stay in the Maldives. Arthur checked the dates. They were leaving in 3 days. Arthur sat back in the creaky motel chair, steepling his fingers. This was the eureka moment, the point in an investigation where the hunch solidified into evidence. Brenda had not just deposited the money, she had actively utilized the commingled funds to purchase assets and experiences for a third party. She had treated the joint account as her personal piggy bank, failing to distinguish between what was hers and what was theirs. In the eyes of a judge, this was a mess. A beautiful, glorious mess. By the time Brenda's lawyers realized what she had done and tried to move the remaining millions into a separate account, which he could see they had done just 2 hours ago, the damage was already foundational. The tracing required to separate the funds would be a nightmare. Every dollar she spent now could be argued as a waste of marital assets. Arthur took a screenshot of the deposit. Click. He took a screenshot of the credit limit upgrade. Click. He took a screenshot of the payment to the car dealership. Click. He downloaded the entire transaction history as a CSV file and saved it to the encrypted hard drive. He labeled the folder simply, "The Mistake." He looked at the digital clock in the corner of his screen. It was nearly midnight. Most men in his position would be drinking cheap whiskey or calling their children in tears. Arthur felt a strange sense of calm. He was not powerless. He was the one holding the pen, and he had just found a discrepancy that would cost Brenda Vance far more than she could ever imagine. He ejected the hard drive and placed it carefully into his briefcase, right next to the blue folder containing the trust documents. He closed the laptop. For the first time all day, the tightness in his chest loosened. He lay down on the stiff motel bed, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. Brenda thought she was playing a game of power. She did not realize she was playing a game of mathematics. And Arthur never lost at math. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Jenkins and Associates law firm, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah Jenkins sat behind her glass desk, her brow furrowed as she looked at the man sitting opposite her. She had known Arthur Vance since she was a teenager mowing lawns in their neighborhood. He had always been the kind, quiet man who trimmed his hedges on Saturdays and tipped generously at the lemonade stand. Seeing him now, in a suit that was clearly 20 years out of style but impeccably pressed, she felt a pang of profound pity. "Arthur, I am so incredibly sorry," Sarah said gently, leaning forward. "My father told me about the text message. It is barbaric. We can file for emergency support immediately. We can get you back into that house within 48 hours if we push hard enough." Arthur did not look like a man in need of pity. He sat with his back straight, his hands folded in his lap. He waited for her to finish speaking, then he reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a single, thick document bound with a metal clip. He placed it on the glass desk with a soft thud. "I appreciate your sympathy, Sarah, but I am here for your strategy," Arthur said, his voice devoid of the tremor she expected. "I do not want to go back into the house." "Not yet." Sarah blinked, confused. She picked up the document. The cover read, "Preliminary Financial Analysis and Asset Tracing, the Estate of Vance versus Vance." She opened it. Her eyes widened as she scanned the first page. It was not a rambling diary of a scorned husband, it was a forensic audit. There were spreadsheets, flow charts, and screenshots of bank transfers. "Arthur," she whispered, flipping to the second page. "You did this last night." "I had trouble sleeping," Arthur replied simply. "As you can see on page 4, Brenda deposited the entire inheritance wire into our joint checking account at 9:30 yesterday morning. By 10:15, she had used that account's new balance to secure a loan for a luxury vehicle for her paramour." Sarah looked up, her lawyer's instincts sharpening. She commingled the funds. She actually commingled $12 million. "Arthur, this is a gift. We need to file an injunction immediately. We need to freeze that account before she moves a single cent more. If we act now, we can argue that the entire inheritance is now community property." She reached for her phone to call her paralegal, but Arthur's hand shot out, hovering just above hers. It was a gentle gesture, but firm enough to make her stop. "No," Arthur said. Sarah frowned. "No. Arthur, she is bleeding the account. She spent $135,000 on a car. If we wait, she could spend $1 million by the end of the month. We have to stop the bleeding." We let it bleed, Arthur said, leaning back in his chair. Sarah stared at him. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. "Excuse me. If you freeze the account today," Arthur explained, his voice taking on the lecture hall cadence of his former life, "her lawyers will argue it was a clerical error. They will say she was grief-stricken, confused, and made a mistake with the routing number. A judge might believe that. A judge might let her correct it, separate the funds, and leave me with nothing but half of a used Ford Taurus." He pointed a callous finger at the document. "But if we wait, if we let her spend, and spend, and spend, it ceases to be a mistake. It becomes a pattern. It becomes a lifestyle. I want her to get comfortable. I want her to buy the car, the vacation, the clothes. I want her to pay off Julian's debts. I want the commingling to be so thorough, so systemic, that no forensic accountant on earth could untangle the knot without cutting it in half." Sarah sat back, stunned. She looked at the kind old neighbor she thought she knew, and saw something else entirely. She saw a predator waiting in the tall grass. "You want to trap her," she said softly. "I want justice," Arthur corrected. "And in my experience, justice is just a math equation that needs to be balanced. We give them 30 days. Let them enjoy their new wealth. Let them feel invincible." Sarah looked down at the file again. The risk was enormous. If Brenda spent too much, there would be nothing left to recover. But if Arthur was right, if they could prove systematic waste of marital assets on an extramarital affair using commingled funds, the payout would be catastrophic for Brenda. 30 days, Sarah repeated, testing the words. "It is risky, Arthur. Very risky." "Brenda has never balanced a checkbook in her life," Arthur said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. "And Julian? I ran a background check on him this morning. He has 3 maxed-out credit cards and a lien on his truck. They will not be able to help themselves." He picked up his briefcase. "Draft the papers, Sarah. Prepare the motion for the freeze, the divorce petition, the demand for the house. Have everything ready to file at 9 o'clock in the morning, exactly 30 days from today. Until then, silence is golden." Arthur walked to the door. Sarah watched him go, a shiver running down her spine. She realized then that Brenda Vance hadn't just divorced her husband, she had declared war on the one man who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried and exactly how much the shovels cost. "I will wait for your call, Arthur," Sarah said. Arthur nodded once, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway, leaving Sarah alone with the dossier of evidence that was slowly ticking like a bomb. The atmosphere inside the house on Oakwood Drive had shifted from the hushed, library-like stillness of Arthur's reign to the chaotic, thumping rhythm of a nightclub. Brenda stood in the center of the master bedroom, a glass of vintage champagne in one hand and a heavy black trash bag in the other. She felt lighter, younger, as if she had shed 40 pounds of dead weight along with her husband. Julian was lounging on the bed she had shared with Arthur for 30 years, wearing nothing but a pair of silk boxers she had bought him yesterday at Saks Fifth Avenue. He was scrolling through property listings on his tablet, his tan chest gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Babe," Julian said, not looking up. "You have to see this place in Key West. It has a private dock. We could get a boat. You have always wanted a boat, right?" "I have always wanted a life," Brenda corrected, tossing a stack of Arthur's folded beige cardigans into the trash bag. She felt a vicious thrill with every item she discarded. His orthopedic loafers. Trash. His collection of gardening magazines. Trash. the framed photograph of his mother that sat on the nightstand. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then swept it into the bag with a clatter of glass. Arthur had been a suffocating blanket of prudence. He counted pennies. He clipped coupons. He drove a car until the wheels practically fell off. Living with him had been a slow death by boredom. But now she had $12 million, and the world was finally in Technicolor. She walked over to the full-length mirror, admiring the way her new emerald necklace caught the light. It had cost $45,000, a sum that would have given Arthur a stroke. "You deserve it," Julian murmured, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. "You spend your whole life taking care of everyone else. Taking care of that old miser. Now it is Brenda's turn." Brenda leaned back into him, letting the compliment wash over her like warm water. "It is my turn," she whispered. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the caterers. Brenda had decided to throw a freedom party for her girlfriends. She wanted them to see. She wanted them to envy. Downstairs, the house was already transforming. The sturdy, antique furniture Arthur loved was being pushed into the garage to make room for white leather sofas Brenda had rented. A team of servers was setting up a raw bar in the kitchen. As the guests arrived, Brenda held court. She laughed too loudly, drank too much, and made sure everyone saw Julian's hand on her lower back. Her friends, women who had pitted her for being married to boring Arthur, now looked at her with a mixture of shock and greed. "So, Arthur is really gone?" her friend Linda asked, eyeing the magnum of champagne on the table. "Just like that. He could not handle my success," Brenda lied smoothly, taking a sip of her drink. "He wanted to control the money. He wanted to put it in some dusty savings account. Can you imagine? I told him, 'Arthur, life is for living.' He did not agree, so I told him to leave." Linda's eyes widened. "And the money? It is safe." Brenda laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Of course it is safe. Uncle Philip left it to me. My name is on the will. My name is on the check. Arthur cannot touch a dime. It is separate property. My lawyer told me that on day one." She believed it because she needed to believe it. She did not understand the legal nuances of commingling. She did not know that by paying for this very party with the joint debit card, she was weaving a rope that Arthur would eventually use to hang her. Later that evening, after the last guest had stumbled out, Julian pulled Brenda onto the new white sofa. He looked serious, his blue eyes intense. "Babe, about that house in Key West," he said softly. "The realtor called. There is another offer. If we want it, we need to move fast. It is $2.5 million. A steal, really. And think of it as an investment. Real estate always goes up. Arthur would want you to be smart with your money, right?" Brenda bristled at the mention of Arthur's name, but Julian's logic appealed to her vanity. An investment. Yes. She was a savvy businesswoman now. She was building an empire. "Buy it," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Wire the deposit tomorrow. Use the main account." Julian grinned, a predatory flash of white teeth. "You are the boss, babe." The next morning, amidst the hangover and the debris of the party, a courier arrived with a thick envelope. Brenda accepted it with a groan, her head pounding. She tore it open in the kitchen. It was a formal letter from Jenkins and Associates. She scanned the header. Sarah Jenkins. That little girl who used to mow their lawn. Arthur had hired a child to fight his battles. The letter was polite but firm. It stated that Arthur Vance had retained counsel and was requesting a preservation of assets pending the final divorce decree. It mentioned fiduciary duties and marital estate. Brenda scoffed and crumpled the letter into a ball. She tossed it into the overflowing trash can, right on top of Arthur's old sweaters. "He thinks he can scare me," she muttered to the empty kitchen. "He thinks he can take what is mine." She poured herself a mimosa and walked out to the patio, looking over the rose garden Arthur had loved so much. It looked overgrown already. She would have Julian hire a landscaper to rip it all out. Maybe put in a pool. She felt invincible. She had the money, she had the man, and she had the house. Arthur was rotting in some cheap motel, and she was the queen of the castle. She took a long sip of champagne, unaware that the castle was built on sand, and the tide was already coming in. 30 days in the Starlight Motel had transformed Arthur Vance's temporary quarters into a command center of forensic warfare. The geometric carpet was now hidden beneath neat stacks of printer paper, each pile representing a specific category of financial hemorrhage: luxury goods, real estate, travel, and the most damning pile of all, cash withdrawals. Arthur sat at the small round table, eating a cup of instant noodles with a plastic fork. He had not eaten a meal costing more than $5 in a month. Every cent he saved was a cent he could use to bury Brenda in court fees. He wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and turned his attention to the laptop screen, where the spreadsheet he had named The Bleeding was open. The numbers were staggering. In just 4 weeks, Brenda had managed to spend nearly $3 million. It was a feat of consumption that would have been impressive if it were not so suicidal. Arthur scrolled down to row 402. Asterisk date, October 12th. Description: wire transfer, Key West Title Company. Amount: $2,500,000, asterisk. She had actually done it. She had bought the vacation home. Arthur clicked on the supporting document, a digital copy of the deed he had pulled from public records that morning. The house was titled in the name of Brenda Vance and Julian Thorne, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Arthur felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in his gut. By putting Julian's name on the deed using money from the joint account, Brenda had not just gifted her lover a house, she had gifted Arthur a slam-dunk legal argument. She had taken marital funds, funds that were legally half Arthur's due to the commingling, and given them to a third party. In legal terms, this was dissipation of assets. In layman's terms, it was theft. But the house was just the tip of the iceberg. Arthur adjusted his glasses and opened the email that had arrived 10 minutes ago from the private investigator he had hired, a man named specialized in corporate fraud. Subject: the Cayman Connection. Arthur opened the attachment. It was a background report on Julian, deeper than the credit check Arthur had run on day one. This report tracked Julian's digital footprint. Mr. Vance, the report read. Asterisk subject: Julian Thorne has opened a new corporate entity in Delaware named Thorne Consulting Group LLC 3 days after you left the residence. We have tracked 4 separate wire transfers from your joint account to this entity totaling $400,000. The memo lines for these transfers are listed as personal training retainer and lifestyle management fees, asterisk. Arthur snorted. Lifestyle management. Julian was managing his lifestyle, all right. He was managing to steal nearly $500,000 right under Brenda's nose. The report continued. Asterisk Thorne Consulting Group LLC has immediately forwarded 90% of these funds to a bank account in the Cayman Islands. We believe Mr. Thorne is preparing an exit strategy, asterisk. Arthur sat back, the plastic fork snapping in his hand. Julian was smarter than he looked. He knew this gravy train would derail eventually. He knew Brenda was a mark. He was siphoning off as much cash as he could before the inevitable crash. He was not building a life with Brenda, he was building a golden parachute for himself. Arthur looked at the calendar on his phone. It had been exactly 30 days. The trap was full. The rat had taken the cheese, and now he was trying to drag the whole block back to his hole. If Arthur waited any longer, the money would be in an offshore jurisdiction where even the best lawyers would struggle to reach it. It was time. He picked up his phone and dialed Sarah Jenkins. It was 7 in the morning, but he knew she would be awake. Arthur. Sarah answered on the first ring. Her voice was tight with anticipation. Is today the day? Today is the day, Arthur said, his voice calm and terrible. She bought the house in Key West. Julian is on the title. Oh, my God, Sarah breathed. She actually did it. We have her on dissipation. There is more, Arthur said. I have evidence that Julian is laundering money from the joint account into a shell company and moving it offshore. $400,000 so far. If we do not freeze the assets by noon, another 100,000 could vanish. I will file the emergency ex parte order immediately, Sarah said, the sound of typing already clacking in the background. I will ask the judge for a temporary restraining order on all financial assets. We will lock them out of everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios. Even the Key West house. Make sure the motion includes a specific request to evict Julian from the marital residence, Arthur added. Use the trust documents. He is a squatter in a home owned by a trust for which I am the sole trustee. I am drafting it now, Sarah said. Arthur, are you sure you are ready for this? Once we file this, the war starts for real. Brenda is going to be blindsided. She thinks she is untouchable. Arthur looked out the window of the motel. He saw a stray cat picking through a dumpster, surviving on scraps. He thought of Brenda in his home, drinking his wine, sleeping in his bed, while her lovers stole their future. I am not just ready, Sarah, Arthur said. I am impatient. File it. He hung up the phone and began to pack his small suitcase. He would not be staying at the Starlight Motel tonight. Tonight, he would be sleeping in a bed with clean sheets, perhaps at the downtown Marriott. He could afford it. After all, the judge was about to grant him control over every single dime Brenda had thought was hers. Miles away, in the master bedroom of the house on Oakwood Drive, Brenda Vance woke up with a headache. The sun was streaming in, too bright, too cheerful. She rolled over, reaching for Julian, but his side of the bed was empty. He was probably at the gym, or perhaps downstairs making smoothies with that expensive new blender she had bought him. She sat up and reached for her phone. She had a spa appointment at 10, and then she needed to go shopping for furniture for the Key West house. She opened her banking app to check the balance, just to give herself that little thrill of seeing all those zeros. Face ID recognized her. The little wheel spun, account locked. Brenda frowned. She tapped the screen again, asterisk access denied. Please contact your financial institution, asterisk. That was odd. Maybe the app was down. She opened her credit card app. Asterisk card suspended. Contact administrator, asterisk. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of her neck. She tried to log into her investment account, frozen by court order. Brenda stared at the words, her brain refusing to process them. Court order. What court order? She was Brenda Vance. She had $12 million. She was the one who gave orders. She scrambled out of bed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She ran downstairs, screaming for Julian. Julian. Something is wrong with the internet. The bank is broken. But the house was silent. The kitchen was empty. There was no smoothie waiting for her. On the counter, where Julian usually left his keys, there was only a ring of condensation from a cold glass. Brenda stood in the middle of her beautiful, stolen kitchen, clutching her phone, while the silence of the house pressed in on her. For the first time in 30 days, she felt a flicker of the one emotion she thought she had banished forever. Fear. And then, the doorbell rang. Not the friendly chime of a delivery driver, but the heavy, authoritative pounding of a process server. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Arthur sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded on top of the blue folder, his expression as unreadable as a marble statue. Beside him, Sarah Jenkins was arranging her documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. On the other side of the aisle, Brenda sat next to a man named Richard Sterling, a lawyer known more for his billboards than his case law. Brenda looked disheveled. The roots of her hair were showing, and she was wearing large sunglasses indoors, likely to hide the puffiness of eyes that had spent the last 48 hours crying over frozen credit cards. Julian was not there. He was presumably back at the house, trying to figure out why the internet bill had bounced. Judge Harrison, a woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for hating drama, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the motion Sarah had filed. "Counsel," the judge said, looking at Sterling. "I have reviewed the plaintiff's evidence regarding the dissipation of marital assets. The purchase of a $2.5 million property in Key West titled to a third party. A $135,000 vehicle gifted to a paramour. This is textbook waste." Sterling stood up, smoothing his expensive tie. "Your Honor, my client inherited a significant sum. She believed these funds were separate property and therefore hers to spend as she pleased. She was under the impression. Ignorance of the law is not a defense for looting the marital estate," Judge Harrison cut in sharply. "Especially when the funds were commingled in a joint account for weeks. I am granting the temporary restraining order. All assets are frozen effective immediately. Mr. Vance is appointed as the interim conservator of the estate to ensure no further funds are siphoned off to," what was the name? "Thorne Consulting Group." Brenda let out a gasp of outrage, but Sterling put a hand on her arm to silence her. "Now," Judge Harrison continued, looking at Arthur. "Regarding the marital residence. Mr. Sterling, your client's counter motion states that she wishes for Mr. Vance to be permanently barred from the property on Oakwood Drive, citing emotional distress." "Yes, Your Honor," Sterling said, gaining confidence. "My client feels unsafe. Mr. Vance abandoned the home 30 days ago. He walked out. We believe he surrendered his rights to residency. We are asking for exclusive possession for Ms. Vance." Arthur felt a small, cold smile touch his lips. It was the smile of a chess player who had seen mate in 3 moves ago. He nudged the blue folder toward Sarah. Sarah stood up. "Your Honor, if I may. Mr. Vance did not abandon the home. He was coerced into leaving under duress. However, the issue of residency is actually quite simple. It is not a matter of divorce law. It is a matter of property law." She walked to the bench and handed the bailiff the document from the blue folder. "The residence at 16 Oakwood Drive is not owned by Arthur Vance. Nor is it owned by Brenda Vance, Sarah said, her voice ringing clear in the silence. Brenda frowned, taking off her sunglasses. What is she talking about? Of course it is my house. Sarah turned to look directly at Brenda. Actually, Ms. Vance, it is not. In 1998, following the bankruptcy of your father's company, you were terrified that his creditors would try to pierce the corporate veil and come after your personal assets. You begged Arthur to protect the house. Arthur watched the memory hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, then closed. So, Sarah continued, Arthur created the Vance Family Revocable Trust. To protect the asset, the title was transferred entirely into the trust. And who is the sole trustee of that trust? She pointed to Arthur. Mr. Arthur Vance. Judge Harrison flipped through the deed. It appears Ms. Jenkins is correct. The property is held in trust. Mr. Vance is the trustee. Ms. Vance, you are listed merely as a beneficiary with right of use, contingent on the trustee's discretion. That means, Sarah said, driving the nail home, that Arthur has the legal authority to manage the property. He determines who is allowed on the premises. And while he cannot evict a beneficiary without cause, he certainly has the authority to evict unauthorized guests who are not named in the trust. Guests like Mr. Julian Thorne. Brenda stood up, knocking her chair back. You cannot do that. Julian lives there. Mr. Thorne is a squatter, Arthur said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, cutting through Brenda's hysteria. He has no lease. He pays no rent. He is not a beneficiary. And as of this moment, I am revoking his permission to be on trust property. Judge Harrison banged her gavel. Ms. Vance, sit down. Brenda collapsed into her chair, looking from her lawyer to Arthur. She had forgotten. In her arrogance, in her greed, she had completely forgotten the safety net Arthur had woven 25 years ago to save her. She had forgotten that she had signed away ownership to him because she trusted him to be her shield. Now, that shield had become a sword. Mr. Vance, Judge Harrison said, looking at Arthur with a newfound respect. The law supports you. As trustee, you have the right to secure the asset. I am issuing an immediate order for the removal of Mr. Julian Thorne from the premises. He has, the judge looked at the clock, until 6 o'clock this evening to vacate. If he is not gone, you are authorized to utilize the sheriff's department for assistance. Thank you, Your Honor, Arthur said. Brenda looked at Arthur, her eyes wide with shock. She had thought he was weak. She had thought he was just an old accountant with a boring car. She was finally realizing that he was the only reason she had ever had a roof over her head in the first place. I am going home, Arthur said to Sarah as the bailiff called the next case. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. He did not look at Brenda. He walked out of the courtroom, his steps echoing on the marble floor. He had a house to reclaim and a pest to exterminate. The flashing lights of the sheriff cruiser cut through the twilight on Oakwood Drive, painting the manicured lawns in alternating strokes of red and blue. Arthur Vance pulled his Ford Taurus to the curb behind the patrol car, checked his watch, and stepped out into the humid evening air. It was exactly 6 o'clock. He walked up the driveway flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. The front door was already open, and the sound of shouting spilled out onto the porch. Inside, the house was a disaster zone of half-packed boxes and scattered designer clothing. Julian was standing in the foyer, shirtless and sweating, screaming at Brenda, who was sobbing on the stairs. "This is insane," Julian yelled, throwing a pair of sneakers into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag. You told me you owned this place. You told me he was gone. Arthur cleared his throat. The sound was soft, but it cut through the noise like a knife. Mr. Thorne, Arthur said, stepping across the threshold. Your tenancy has been revoked. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. Julian spun around, his face twisting into a sneer. He took a step toward Arthur, his hands balling into fists. Listen here, old man, Julian spat. I am not going anywhere. Brenda invited me here. This is her house. Actually, one of the deputies interjected, stepping between them with a hand resting on his belt. The deed indicates this property is held by the Vance Family Trust. Mr. Vance is the trustee. You are, legally speaking, trespassing on private property. You need to grab your things and go, son. Now. Brenda scrambled down the stairs, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Arthur, please. You cannot do this. Where is he supposed to go? He has nowhere else. That is hardly my concern, Arthur replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. He has been living here rent-free for a month. I assume he has saved enough of your money to afford a motel. Perhaps the Starlight. It has excellent rates. Julian looked from the deputy to Arthur, realizing the power dynamic had shifted tectonically. He let out a string of curses and began shoving clothes into his bag with violent, jerky movements. He grabbed a silver watch from the console table. Put it back, Arthur said. Julian froze. That is an asset of the trust, Arthur explained calmly. As is the television you were attempting to unmount from the wall. As is the espresso machine. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Everything else stays. You are joking, Julian snarled. Brenda gave me that watch. She did not have the authority to gift trust assets, Arthur said. Put it back. The deputy took a step forward. Do as he says, sir. Julian slammed the watch onto the table, cracking the crystal face. He zipped up his bag, hoisted it onto his shoulder, and turned to Brenda. His eyes, usually full of seductive charm, were now cold and hard. You are useless, he hissed at her. You said you were rich. You said you were in charge. You are just a pathetic old woman playing house with daddy money. Brenda recoiled as if slapped. Julian. How can you say that? I am out of here, Julian said. Don't call me. He stormed past Arthur, deliberately bumping his shoulder, and marched out into the night. Arthur did not flinch. He watched Julian throw his bag into his truck, the same truck that Arthur knew had a lien on it, and peel out of the driveway, leaving a strip of rubber on the asphalt. The deputies nodded to Arthur. If you have any more trouble, Mr. Vance, give us a call. Thank you, officers, Arthur said. When the door clicked shut, the silence that descended was heavy and suffocating. Brenda stood at the bottom of the stairs, trembling. She looked at Arthur, waiting for him to scream, to gloat, to throw her out too. Arthur did not. He simply walked past her into the living room. He picked up a coaster that had been thrown on the floor and placed it back on the coffee table. You are not kicking me out. Brenda whispered, her voice small. Arthur turned to look at her. He adjusted his glasses. You are a beneficiary of the trust, Brenda, he said. The trust documents state that the beneficiary has the right to reside in the property, provided they do not commit waste or violate the terms of the agreement. You may stay. Brenda let out a sob of relief. Oh, Arthur. Thank you. I knew you still. However, Arthur continued, cutting her off. As trustee, I am enforcing the preservation clauses. Effective immediately, there will be no parties. No unauthorized guests. No lavish expenditures on household accounts. The credit cards associated with this address have been suspended. I have instituted a weekly allowance for groceries, which I will monitor. Brenda stared at him, the relief turning to horror. Allowance? I am 65 years old. I have $12 million. You had $12 million, Arthur corrected gently. You have significantly less now, and what remains is currently frozen by a court order pending our divorce trial. Until then, I am the court-appointed conservator. I control the purse strings, Brenda. Just as I did when I saved your father. Just as I always have. He walked toward the hallway leading to the master bedroom. I will be sleeping in the master suite, Arthur said over his shoulder. You may take the guest room. It is quite comfortable. I believe Julian found it satisfactory before he moved into my bed. Arthur. Brenda cried out. You cannot treat me like a child. Then stop acting like one, Arthur said. He walked into the bedroom and closed the door. He heard Brenda collapse onto the stairs, weeping loudly, but the sound did not move him. He locked the door, took off his jacket, and hung it neatly in the closet, pushing aside Brenda's sequin dresses to make space. He was back. And this time, he was not just the husband. He was the landlord. The fluorescent lights of the supermart hummed overhead as Arthur pushed his cart through the automatic doors and into the humid night air. He had purchased a loaf of whole wheat bread, a carton of eggs, and a bag of apples, sustenance for a man living within his means. He walked toward his Ford Taurus, the plastic bags rustling softly against his leg. The parking lot was largely empty, save for a few scattered sedans and a familiar, hulking black truck parked diagonally across two spaces near his car. Arthur did not slow his pace. He had expected this. Desperate men rarely disappeared quietly. As he reached his truck, the truck's door flew open. Julian stepped out, looking more disheveled than he had the previous evening. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of cheap whiskey. He marched toward Arthur, his boots crunching loudly on the asphalt. You think you are funny, old man? Julian growled, stopping inches from Arthur's face. You think you can just snap your fingers and ruin my life? Arthur placed his grocery bags into the trunk and closed the lid with a solid thud. He turned to face the younger man, adjusting his glasses. I did not ruin your life, Mr. Thorne, Arthur said calmly. I simply stopped you from ruining mine. Julian shoved Arthur hard against the side of the Taurus. Arthur winced as the metal handle of the door dug into his back, but he did not cry out. I should smash your face in right now, Julian hissed, raising a fist. Nobody would see. Just you and me. You owe me, Vance. You owe me for the time I wasted on your crazy wife. Arthur looked at the fist, then up at Julian's eyes. He did not blink. If you strike me, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, conversational register, I will add assault and battery to the file I am sending to the Internal Revenue Service tomorrow morning. Julian hesitated. The fist lowered slightly. What are you talking about? Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He did not hand it to Julian, he simply held it up. Thorne Consulting Group LLC, Arthur read. Incorporated in Delaware. You have received $400,000 in transfers from my wife in the last 30 days. However, According to my review of your public tax filings for the years 2018 through 2023, you reported an average annual income of only $22,000. Julian's face went pale under the streetlights. Tax evasion is a serious federal crime, Mr. Thorne, Arthur continued, his tone clinical. Especially when it involves wire fraud and moving assets to offshore accounts in the Caymans to hide them from a divorce proceeding. That is not just a fine. That is prison time. 5 to 10 years, I believe. You are bluffing, Julian stammered, stepping back. You don't know anything. I am a forensic accountant, Arthur said, tucking the paper back into his pocket. I know everything. I know about the shell company. I know about the account at First Caribbean International Bank. I even know that you claimed your pickup truck as a business expense for a mobile consulting unit while using it solely for personal transport. Julian looked around the empty parking lot, suddenly looking very small and very young. The bravado evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of a man realizing he was standing in a trap. What do you want? Julian whispered. I want you to disappear, Arthur said. I want you to leave this town. I want you to never contact my wife again. And if I see your truck in my driveway, or if I hear that you have threatened me or anyone associated with me, I will mail this file to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Do we have an understanding? Julian stared at him for a long moment, breathing hard. Then, without a word, he turned and ran back to his truck. He scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys, and roared the engine to life. The truck peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, and sped away into the darkness. Arthur watched him go. He brushed the invisible dust from his jacket where Julian had grabbed him. He was not shaking. His heart rate was elevated, but his mind was clear. He got into his car and started the engine. Before he could put it in gear, his phone rang. The screen displayed Brenda. He answered it on the second ring. Hello, Brenda. You monster. Brenda screamed on the other end, her voice thick with hysteria. Julian just called me. He was crying. He said he is leaving for Mexico. He said you threatened to send him to jail. How could you be so cruel? He is a good man. He is a tax cheat and a con artist, Arthur said, pulling out of the parking space. And he is fleeing the country because he knows I have the evidence to prove it. You are ruining everything. Brenda shrieked. You are jealous. You are a bitter, jealous old man who cannot stand to see me happy. I hate you, Arthur. I hate you. Arthur listened to the venom pouring out of the phone. Once, those words would have cut him to the bone. Now, they were just noise. Good night, Brenda, Arthur said. Make sure you lock the front door. The alarm code has been changed. He hung up the phone and drove home to the quiet, empty house that was finally, truly beginning to feel like his again. The uneasy truce in the house on Oakwood Drive lasted for 3 days. It was a silence filled with the click of Arthur's keyboard from the study and the muffled sounds of Brenda's weeping from the guest bedroom. But on the fourth morning, the weeping stopped. Brenda emerged from her room not in her pajamas, but in a soft cashmere sweater and pearls, her hair freshly styled. She looked like the woman Arthur had married 20 years ago, before the money, before the bitterness. Arthur was in the kitchen, brewing his morning tea. He watched her enter, noting the calculated softness in her movements. She was trying to play a card she had not used in a decade, affection. Arthur, she said softly, leaning against the counter. Can we sit down? Just for a moment. I made coffee. Arthur nodded slowly. He took his tea to the breakfast nook, the same table where they had planned vacations and discussed mortgages for half a lifetime. Brenda sat opposite him, sliding a mug across the granite surface. She did not drink. She just stared at him with wide, pleading eyes. "I have been thinking, Arthur," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About us. About everything. This legal war. It is tearing us apart. It is destroying the memories of 45 years. Do you really want our marriage to end in a courtroom, with strangers fighting over every spoon and fork?" Arthur took a sip of tea. "I did not choose the courtroom, Brenda. You chose the text message. You chose the locks. You chose Julian." "I know," she said quickly, reaching out to cover his hand with hers. Her skin felt cold. "I made a mistake. A terrible, foolish mistake. I was confused. I was grieving Uncle Philip. And Julian, he manipulated me. He took advantage of my vulnerability. But he is gone now. It is just us." She squeezed his hand. "I want to make this right, Arthur. I want you to be happy. I know you never cared about money. You are a simple man. You like your garden, your books. You do not need millions to be happy." Arthur pulled his hand back, placing it in his lap. "Get to the point, Brenda." Brenda took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. It was a personal check written in her loopy, ornate handwriting. $500,000. "I spoke to my lawyer," Brenda said, her voice gaining a little speed. "He said this is very generous. It is $500,000, Arthur. Cash. You could buy a nice condo in Florida. You could retire comfortably. No lawyers, no fighting. You take this, you sign a quitclaim deed for the house and the remaining assets, and we walk away friends. We preserve our dignity." Arthur looked at the check. Then he looked at Brenda. He did not see his wife. He saw a defendant trying to settle a fraud case for pennies on the dollar. "You think $500,000 is generous?" Arthur asked, his voice flat. "It is a fortune." Brenda insisted. "Think of what you could do with it." Arthur stood up and walked to the kitchen drawer. He pulled out a calculator and returned to the table. "Let us do the math, Brenda," Arthur said, punching in numbers. The inheritance was $12 million. Under Connecticut law, because you commingled it, it is subject to equitable distribution. That is 50%. $6 million. Brenda flinched. "But..." "Plus," Arthur continued, ignoring her. "The house is currently valued at $1.8 million. Since it is in a trust, and I am the trustee, and you are merely a beneficiary who violated the terms of the trust by allowing a squatter to damage the property, I could argue for a larger share. But let us be conservative. Half. $900,000. He pressed another button. "Then we have the dissipation of assets. The $2.5 million you spent on the Key West house. The $135,000 for the car. The $400,000 you wired to Julian's shell company. That totals over $3 million of wasted marital funds. The court will likely deduct that entire amount from your share, effectively awarding it to me." He turned the calculator around so she could see the screen. The number read, $8,900,000. "That is what the law says I am owed, Brenda," Arthur said calmly. And you are offering me $500,000? That is not an offer. That is an insult. Brenda's face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. The mask of the grieving, confused widow dropped instantly, revealing the snarl of the woman who had thrown him out a month ago. You are greedy, she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. You are a greedy, leeching old man. That is my money. Uncle Philip left it to me. You did not earn a cent of it. You just sat there with your spreadsheets while I suffered. Arthur stood up, picking up his tea. I suffered for 45 years, Brenda. I cleaned up your father's messes. I paid off your credit cards. I managed this house. I gave you a life you could never have afforded on your own. And now, I am simply collecting my salary. I will not let you take it. Brenda screamed, standing up to face him. I will hire the best lawyers in New York. I will spend every dime I have to make sure you get nothing. I will drag this out until you are dead. You are welcome to try, Arthur said. But remember, every dollar you spend on lawyers is 50 cents coming out of my pocket. And I assure you, I can count pennies much longer than you can. He turned to leave the kitchen, stopping at the doorway. By the way, Arthur added, I would not try to cash any more checks if I were you. The freezing order went into full effect at 9 o'clock this morning. That check you just wrote? It is just a piece of paper. Brenda let out a shriek of pure, impotent rage and swept the mug of coffee off the table. It shattered against the wall, splashing dark liquid over the pristine white cabinets. Arthur did not flinch. He did not look back. He walked down the hall to his study, closed the door, and locked it. As he sat down at his desk, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was not pain. It was not anger. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally being lifted. For weeks, a small part of him had still held on to the hope that the woman he loved was still in there somewhere, buried under the greed. But that woman was gone. She had been bought out for $12 million. Arthur opened his laptop. He opened the file labeled Divorce Strategy. He highlighted the row labeled Settlement Negotiations and changed the status to Failed. Then, he opened a new email to Sarah Jenkins. Subject: Proceed to trial. Sarah, the opposing party has rejected a reasonable resolution and threatened a scorched earth legal strategy. Please proceed with the full discovery process. We are no longer negotiating. We are liquidating, Arthur. He hit send. The final bridge had been burned. Now, the only way out was through the fire. The conference room at Jenkins and Associates was silent, save for the rhythmic turning of pages. Arthur Vance sat at the head of the mahogany table, surrounded by bankers' boxes filled with 5 years of credit card statements, bank records, and phone logs. It had been 2 weeks since Brenda had smashed his coffee mug against the kitchen wall, and in that time, Arthur had not spoken a word to her. He spoke only to the paper. Sarah Jenkins walked in, placing a steaming cup of black coffee near Arthur's elbow. She looked tired. The discovery phase of a contested divorce was usually a marathon of boredom, but Arthur treated it like a high-stakes chess match. Arthur, Sarah said gently. We have enough. We have the commingling. We have the waste of assets. We have the Key West deed. We can prove she spent $3 million of marital funds. That alone gets you the lion's share of the estate. Why are we going back to 2023? Arthur did not look up. He adjusted his glasses, running his finger down a column of numbers on a statement from August, 3 months before Uncle Philip had died. Because, Sarah, Arthur said, his voice low and raspy from disuse. The narrative is currently that Brenda was a grieving niece who made foolish financial decisions in the wake of a sudden windfall. That paints her as incompetent but sympathetic. A victim of sudden wealth syndrome. He paused, tapping a specific line item with his pen. But if I can prove that she was planning this exit before the money arrived, if I can prove that she and Julian were already spending marital funds on their affair while I was sitting at home paying the electric bill, then she is not a victim. She is a conspirator. Sarah leaned in. What did you find? Arthur spun a document around. It was a statement for Brenda's personal Visa card, a card Arthur had rarely checked because the limit was low. Look at these entries, Arthur said. August 12th. August 26th. September 9th. Recurring charges of $500 to a vendor listed as Thorn Wellness Solutions. Sarah frowned. That sounds like Julian's shell company. Personal training sessions. That is what Brenda told me, Arthur replied. She said she was seeing a specialist for her sciatica. But look at the merchant category code. Sarah squinted at the small 4-digit number next to the transaction. 7011. Arthur sat back, a grim look of satisfaction crossing his face. 7011 is the universal code for hotels and lodging. If this were a gym or a personal trainer, the code would be 7991 or 7298. He pulled another sheet of paper from a separate pile. This was the report from the private investigator, containing archived screenshots of Julian's now deleted Instagram account. On August 12th, Julian posted a photo of 2 glasses of champagne by a pool. The caption read, "Living the high life with my secret queen." The location tag was the Grandview Hotel. Arthur pushed the 2 documents together. Thorn Wellness Solutions is not a gym, Arthur stated. It is a payment processor Julian set up to mask hotel charges. Brenda was paying him $500 a night to sleep with her at the Grandview, and she was disguising it as medical therapy on our credit card statements. Sarah's eyes widened. She grabbed the papers, her lawyer's mind racing through the implications. This proves the affair predates the inheritance by months, she whispered. And it proves they were actively conspiring to hide assets and deceive you long before the divorce was filed. This destroys her credibility entirely. It proves premeditation. There is more, Arthur said. He flipped to October, the month Uncle Philip died. 2 days before Philip passed away, Brenda charged $2,000 to a law firm in the city. Not a divorce lawyer. An estate planning lawyer. Arthur looked up at Sarah, his eyes cold. She knew, Sarah. She knew Philip was dying. She knew she was in the will. She hired a lawyer to ask about shielding the money from me before the man was even in the ground. And then, when the money hit the account, she executed the plan, Sarah finished. Or she tried to. But she got greedy and messed up the transfer. Arthur closed the file folder with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. She did not just fall out of love, Arthur said softly. She calculated my obsolescence. She waited until her ship came in, and then she threw me overboard. He stood up, gathering the stack of damning evidence. He placed it neatly into his briefcase, right next to the trust documents and the forensic audit of the Cayman accounts. Draft the final motion, Sarah, Arthur said. We are not just asking for half anymore. We are asking for a finding of fraud. I want the judge to see that this was not a divorce. It was a heist. Sarah looked at the man standing before her. He was no longer the quiet accountant who trimmed roses. He was an executioner in a tweed jacket. "I will have the papers ready by morning," Sarah said. Arthur nodded. "Good. Because I want Brenda to read them before breakfast." He walked out of the conference room, ready to deliver the final blow to the woman who had underestimated him for 45 years. The ledger was almost balanced. There was just one final entry to make. The Superior Court of Connecticut was a theater of mahogany and marble, designed to intimidate the guilty and humble the proud. On the morning of the trial, the air conditioning was humming a low, monotonous drone that seemed to vibrate in Arthur Vance's teeth. He sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture rigid, his hands resting on the edge of the sleek black binder that contained the autopsy of his marriage. Beside him, Sarah Jenkins looked nervous. She kept smoothing the front of her skirt and checking her watch. Across the aisle, however, the mood was entirely different. Brenda Vance sat next to Richard Sterling, her new lead counsel. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. His tan was too orange, his teeth were too white, and his pinstripe suit was aggressively tailored. Brenda, by contrast, was dressed in a soft, pale blue cardigan and a modest skirt, an outfit clearly chosen to suggest fragility and innocence. She held a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that were dry. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Harrison swept into the room, her robes billowing like storm clouds. She took her seat, arranged her files, and looked over her spectacles at the assembly. "Docket number 4429, Vance versus Vance," she read. "We are here for the final dissolution of marriage and the equitable distribution of the marital estate. Mr. Sterling, you may begin your opening statement." Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He walked to the center of the room, turning his back on the judge to address the gallery, though there was no jury. It was a performance for an audience of one, Brenda. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice a rich baritone practiced in front of mirrors. "We are here today to discuss a tragedy. Not a tragedy of finance, but a tragedy of control. For 45 years, my client, Brenda Vance, lived in a prison. There were no bars, but there were walls. Walls built of spreadsheets. Walls built of budgets. Walls built of a husband who valued a balanced checkbook more than the happiness of his own wife." Arthur watched Sterling pace. He did not blink. He picked up his fountain pen and made a small, precise note on his legal pad. "Argument relies on emotional duress, lacks evidentiary support." "Arthur Vance is a forensic accountant," Sterling continued, gesturing accusingly at Arthur. "A man who sees the world in black and white. Debit and credit. He controlled every penny my client spent. He made her ask for permission to buy groceries. He made her feel small, incompetent, and dependent. So, when her beloved Uncle Philip passed away and left her a legacy, a life-changing inheritance, she saw it not just as money, but as freedom." Sterling paused for dramatic effect, resting a hand on Brenda's shoulder. She looked down, trembling on cue. "Yes, she made mistakes in how she deposited the money," Sterling admitted, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She is not a banker. She is a woman who was grieving and desperate to escape a suffocating marriage. She acted out of fear. And now, this man, this controller, wants to use her confusion to steal her family's legacy. He wants to take the money her uncle meant for her and claim it as his own. That is not justice, Your Honor. That is theft." Brenda let out a soft, choked sob. Sterling looked at her with practiced sympathy before returning to his seat. Judge Harrison looked unimpressed, but she nodded. "Miss Jenkins." Sarah stood up. She did not pace. She stayed behind the table. Your Honor, this case is not about feelings. It is about math. It is about the law. And the law is clear on commingling and dissipation. We intend to prove that Mrs. Vance did not act out of confusion, but out of calculated greed. Simple. Direct. Arthur nodded his approval. Sterling called Brenda to the stand first. She walked up slowly, clutching her tissue like a lifeline. She was sworn in and sat down, looking small in the large leather chair. Brenda, Sterling asked softly, tell the court why you deposited the inheritance into the joint account. I didn't know what else to do, Brenda stammered, her voice wavering. Arthur always handled the banking. I was never allowed to touch the accounts. When the check came, I panicked. I wanted to put it somewhere safe until I could figure out how to leave him. I was so scared he would find out and take it away from me. And the car? Sterling asked. The Porsche. I just wanted to feel something, Brenda whispered, tears finally spilling over. For 45 years, I drove used cars. I wore old clothes. I just wanted one nice thing. Just one thing that was mine. And Mr. Thorne? Sterling asked, leading the witness carefully. He was a friend, Brenda said, sniffing. A personal trainer. He listened to me. He told me I was worth something. Arthur never told me that. Arthur just told me I was over budget. Arthur wrote in his notebook, *perjury. Thorne payments began August 12th. Verify hotel records, *. Sarah leaned over to Arthur, whispering. She is playing the victim card hard. The judge looked sympathetic. Let her talk, Arthur whispered back, his eyes fixed on the page. She is digging a hole. Every lie she tells is another shovel of dirt. We do not need to interrupt her. We just need to wait until she is deep enough that she cannot climb out. Brenda continued her testimony for an hour, painting a portrait of a lonely, oppressed housewife who had been swept away by a windfall she didn't understand. She claimed she didn't know Julian was using her money. She claimed she thought the Key West house was a joint investment for her retirement. She claimed she had no idea that moving money made it community property. By the time she finished, Sterling looked triumphant. He believed he had crafted a narrative of emotional abuse that would overshadow the financial facts. Your witness, Sterling said with a smirk. Arthur closed his notebook. He looked at Sarah. Destroy her, Arthur said softly. Sarah stood up, picking up the heavy black binder. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking on the floor. She did not look sympathetic. She looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. Mrs. Vance, Sarah began, opening the binder to tab 12. You stated that you were confused about the banking and that you had no intention of sharing this money with your husband. Is that correct? Yes, Brenda said, wiping her eyes. I wanted a divorce. And you stated that you met Mr. Thorne strictly for personal training to help with your back pain. Yes. Sarah pulled the document from the binder. Then can you explain, Mrs. Vance, why on August 12th, 3 months before your uncle died, you charged $500 to Thorne Wellness Solutions with a merchant code for the Grandview Hotel? Brenda froze. The tissue in her hand stopped moving. I don't recall that, she said. Sarah flipped the page. And on August 26th, another $500. And September 9th. And can you explain why, on October 15th, The day before your uncle died, you visited the offices of Miller and O'Brien estate planners. Brenda's eyes darted to Sterling, who was suddenly sitting up very straight. I went to ask about a will, Brenda said. Your will? Sarah asked. Or a strategy to hide a future inheritance from your husband? Objection. Sterling shouted. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Harrison said, but her eyes were narrowed at Brenda. Sarah lowered the binder. Mrs. Vance, you testified that you were scared of your husband. Yet, you felt comfortable enough to spend $3 million of marital funds in 4 weeks while he was living in a motel. Does that sound like the behavior of a terrified woman? Or does it sound like the behavior of a woman who thought she had won the lottery and discarded her husband like a used ticket? Brenda looked at the judge, then at Arthur. Arthur sat motionless, his face a mask of calm judgment. I just wanted to be happy, Brenda whispered, her voice losing its theatrical quality and becoming small and frightened. Sarah closed the binder with a sharp snap. No further questions, Your Honor. As Brenda walked back to her seat, she looked at Arthur. He did not look away. He simply turned the page of his notebook, ready for the next entry. The emotional narrative had just collided with the hard wall of evidence, and Arthur could see the cracks beginning to form. Arthur Vance walked to the witness stand with the same measured pace he used to walk to his mailbox. He carried nothing but his spectacles and a single, slim flash drive. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down, smoothing the creases of his trousers. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at Brenda. He fixed his gaze on Judge Harrison, acknowledging her as the only person in the room whose opinion mattered. Mr. Vance, Sarah Jenkins began, standing near the jury box, though the box was empty. Can you state your former profession for the court? I was a senior forensic accountant for the firm of Deloitte & Touche for 30 years, Arthur replied. His voice was not loud, but it had a timbre of absolute authority. I specialized in corporate fraud, asset tracing, and high net worth divorce litigation. Sarah nodded. And in your professional opinion, Mr. Vance, was the deposit of $12 million into your joint checking account on October 29 a clerical error, as Mrs. Vance suggests? Arthur adjusted his glasses. No. It was a strategic maneuver. Can you explain? Arthur turned slightly toward the judge. If the court permits, I have prepared a visual analysis of the transaction flow. Judge Harrison nodded. Proceed. Arthur plugged the flash drive into the court's presentation system. A large screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a complex but clearly color-coded flow chart. Exhibit A, Arthur said, pointing to a red box at the top of the chart. This represents the inheritance check. Mrs. Vance claimed she deposited this into the joint account out of confusion. However, if you look at the timeline, you will see that at 10:15 in the morning, 45 minutes after the deposit, she accepted a digital offer from the bank to upgrade her status to Diamond Private Client. He clicked a button, and the screen zoomed in on a screenshot of the banking app. This status is only available to customers with a liquid balance of over $10 million, Arthur explained. It comes with specific perks. A concierge service, waived wire transfer fees, and, most importantly, an instant credit limit increase on the associated Visa Black Card to $200,000. Arthur looked at Brenda, who was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She did not deposit the money by mistake, Arthur continued. She deposited it because she needed the instant credit line boost to make a down payment on a luxury vehicle that same afternoon. She leveraged the marital asset to finance a personal liability. That is not an accident, Your Honor. That is premeditation. Sterling jumped up. Objection. The witness is speculating on my client's state of mind. Overruled, Judge Harrison said, leaning forward. The evidence speaks to intent. Continue, Mr. Vance. Arthur clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a spreadsheet titled Dissipation of Marital Assets. It was a wall of numbers, but Arthur navigated it like a conductor leading an orchestra. Let us discuss the concept of waste, Arthur said. In the 30 days following her departure from the marital home, Mrs. Vance spent a total of $3,142,000. He pointed to a line item. $135,000 for a Porsche 911. Titled in the name of Julian Thorne. This is a direct transfer of marital wealth to a third-party paramour. He pointed to another line. $2,500,000 for a property in Key West. Again, titled jointly with Mr. Thorne. He looked at Sterling. Your client testified that I controlled her. That I forced her to live a life of deprivation. But the math tells a different story. Arthur clicked to a new slide. It was a comparative analysis titled Historical Lifestyle versus Post-Separation Spending. For 45 years, I managed our finances to ensure we had zero debt and a fully funded retirement, Arthur said. I paid off her father's bankruptcy debts, totaling $400,000 in 1982. I paid for her mother's assisted living care, totaling $200,000 between 2010 and 2015. I did not control her spending to be cruel. I controlled it to keep us solvent because my wife has a documented history of financial illiteracy. Sterling stood up, his face flushing. You are calling your wife stupid. I am calling her fiscally irresponsible, Arthur corrected calmly. And I am proving it with data. In 1 month without my supervision, she managed to burn through 25% of a fortune that should have lasted her generations. She did not buy freedom, Mr. Sterling. She bought chaos. And she used my share of the estate to pay for it. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Arthur was not ranting. He was not shouting. He was dismantling Brenda's character, her defense, and her future with the cold, hard precision of a scalpel. Sarah Jenkins stepped forward. Mr. Vance, based on your calculations, what is the current value of the remaining marital estate? Arthur looked at the final number on his spreadsheet. After deducting the waste, the legal fees, and the debts incurred by Mrs. Vance's spending spree, the liquid assets remaining in the joint accounts total approximately $8 million. And what is your proposed distribution? Sarah asked. Arthur looked at the judge. Since Mrs. Vance has already spent and wasted over $3 million, and since the law requires an equitable 50-50 split of the original commingled total, the math is simple. The $3 million she wasted is her advance. She has already received nearly her entire share. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief. Therefore, Arthur concluded, looking directly at Brenda. The remaining $8 million in the account belongs to me. As does the house, which is held in my trust. Mrs. Vance has effectively spent herself out of the marriage. Brenda gasped, a sound that was audible throughout the room. She turned to Sterling, clutching his arm. He cannot do that. Tell him he cannot do that. Sterling looked pale. He looked at the charts. He looked at the judge, who was nodding slowly as she took notes. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had brought a knife to a gunfight and Arthur Vance had just launched a nuclear missile. "I have no further questions," Sarah said, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Arthur closed his laptop. He did not leave the stand immediately. He waited for the judge to dismiss him, maintaining his composure until the very end. He had turned the boring, gray world of accounting into a weapon of mass destruction, and the devastation was absolute. Richard Sterling, realizing his client's narrative of the victimized wife had just been shredded by a spreadsheet, attempted to salvage the situation. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers. "Your Honor," he stammered. "Mr. Vance's testimony it is cold. It is calculated. But it does not prove that my client acted with malice. It only proves she is bad at math. We rest our case." Sterling sat down, avoiding Brenda's gaze. He knew the ship was sinking, and he was already looking for the lifeboats. Judge Harrison looked at Sarah Jenkins. "Miss Jenkins, do you have any redirect?" "Actually, Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the courtroom like a bell. "We have one final rebuttal witness. We call Mr. Julian Thorne to the stand." The color drained from Brenda's face so fast it looked as though she might faint. She whipped her head around toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. "Julian," she whispered. The doors opened. Julian Thorne walked in. He was not wearing the tight muscle shirts or the designer sunglasses Brenda was used to. He wore an ill-fitting, cheap gray suit that looked like he had bought it off a rack an hour ago. His tan seemed to have faded into a sickly pallor, and his eyes were darting nervously around the room, landing everywhere except on Brenda. He walked past the defense table. Brenda reached out a hand, her fingers brushing the fabric of his jacket. "Julian," she hissed. "What are you doing here?" Julian flinched away from her touch as if she were radioactive. He kept his head down and marched straight to the witness stand. He was sworn in, his voice barely a mumble. Arthur sat perfectly still at the plaintiff's table. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had already read the end of the book and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. He had made Julian a simple offer the night in the parking lot: testify truthfully about the money, or face a federal tax evasion investigation that would put him in prison until he was 50. Julian, being a survivor, had chosen the path of least resistance. Sarah Jenkins approached the stand. She did not need to be aggressive. She knew the witness was already broken. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah began, "you were in a relationship with Mrs. Vance for approximately 6 months, is that correct?" "Yes," Julian said, staring at his hands. "And during that time, you received gifts, cash transfers, and property titles totaling over $3 million. Correct?" "Yes." "Did Mrs. Vance ever explain to you why she was moving so much money so quickly?" Julian swallowed hard. He risked a glance at Arthur, who offered him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "She did," Julian said. "Please tell the court what she said," Sarah instructed. Brenda leaned forward, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Don't you dare, Julian," she shrieked. "Don't you dare lie." "Ms. Vance," Judge Harrison barked. "One more outburst and I will have you removed. Answer the question, Mr. Thorne." Julian took a shaky breath. She told me we had to spend it fast." "Spend it fast?" Sarah repeated. "Why?" "Because she said Arthur was going to freeze it," Julian admitted, his voice gaining a little strength. "She said, and I quote, 'Let us burn through the cash before the old miser figures out the password.'" She wanted to hide the assets. She told me to put the Key West house in my name so that when the divorce happened, Arthur couldn't touch it. She said it was a way to launder the money out of the marriage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Brenda stared at Julian, her mouth agape. The betrayal was absolute. The man she had destroyed her marriage for, the man she had bought a Porsche for, was now driving the final nail into her coffin. She said she hated him, Julian continued, the words tumbling out now. She said she wanted to leave him with nothing. She laughed about it. She said Arthur was too stupid to catch us. Sterling buried his face in his hands. It was over. The intent to defraud was now a matter of public record, testified to by the co-conspirator. "And Mr. Thorne," Sarah asked, pausing for effect. "Why are you telling us this now? Why turn on the woman who gave you everything?" Julian looked at Brenda, his eyes cold and empty. "Because she lied to me too," he said. "She told me the money was hers. She told me it was safe. She didn't tell me I was helping her commit a crime. I am not going to jail for her. I am not going down with this ship. No further questions, Your Honor." Sarah turned and walked back to her seat. Brenda sat frozen in her chair. The reality of her situation crashed down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. She had lost her husband. She had lost her lover. She had lost her reputation. And now, she realized with a terrifying clarity, she was about to lose every single dollar she had thought was hers. She looked across the aisle at Arthur. He was putting his pen back into his pocket. He did not look triumphant. He looked tired. He looked at her not with hate, but with a profound, pitying indifference. He had warned her. He had tried to settle. He had given her every chance to walk away with dignity. But she had wanted a war. And Arthur Vance never lost a war. Judge Harrison banged her gavel, silencing the room. "I have heard enough," the judge said, her voice icy. "I am ready to issue my ruling." Judge Harrison cleared her throat, a sound that echoed with finality in the hushed courtroom. She looked over her spectacles at Brenda Vance, who was trembling in her seat, clutching the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from sliding into an abyss. The judge adjusted the stack of files before her and began to speak in a voice devoid of emotion but heavy with authority. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented by the plaintiff, including the forensic accounting records and the testimony of Mr. Thorne, this court finds that Mrs. Brenda Vance engaged in a systematic and calculated dissipation of marital assets. The judge continued, stating that the law was designed to protect spouses, not to enable theft. She noted that Brenda had treated the joint inheritance not as a shared blessing, but as a weapon to discard her husband of 45 years. Therefore, the court ruled that the $3,142,000 Mrs. Vance had already spent on luxury vehicles, vacations, and gifts for her paramour would be considered her full and final advance on the equitable distribution of the estate. The remaining $8 million in the joint accounts, along with the full ownership of the marital residence held in the Vance Family Trust, were awarded solely to Mr. Arthur Vance. Brenda let out a strangled cry, burying her face in her hands as the reality of her destitution crashed down upon her. She had gambled everything on her greed and her vanity, and she had lost. The judge banged her gavel, dismissing the court. Arthur stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. He did not look at the sobbing woman across the aisle, nor did he look at Julian, who was already slinking out the back door like a frightened rat. Arthur gathered his files, placed his pen in his pocket, and walked out of the courtroom with the steady, quiet dignity of a man who had balanced the ledger perfectly. He walked out into the bright afternoon sun, took a deep breath of the fresh air, and hailed a taxi. He was finally going home. 6 months later, the garden behind the house on Oakwood Drive was in full bloom. The roses, once neglected during the chaos of the divorce, were now vibrant and healthy, their petals unfurling in shades of deep red and soft pink. Arthur Vance knelt in the soil, his hands gloved, carefully pruning a dead branch from his prize-winning bush. He found a profound peace in the garden. It was a place where effort yielded beauty, where patience was rewarded, and where weeds were easily removed. He stood up, wiping his brow, and looked out over the lawn that was finally, truly his. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text message from a number he had deleted but recognized immediately. It was Brenda. The message was long and rambling, filled with apologies and excuses. She wrote that Julian had left her for a younger woman in Mexico, taking the last of her jewelry. She wrote that she was living in a small studio apartment and struggling to pay the rent. She asked if they could meet for coffee, just for old time's sake, hinting that perhaps she could come back home. Arthur read the message twice. He remembered the woman he had married, the girl who had needed saving 45 years ago. But then he remembered the woman in the red dress who had laughed at him in the hallway. He remembered the woman who had bought a Porsche for her lover while he slept in a motel. He realized that forgiveness did not mean allowing toxicity back into his life. He pressed his thumb against the screen, selected the message, and hit delete. Then, he blocked the number. He put the phone back in his pocket and picked up his shears. There was still work to do in the garden, and Arthur Vance intended to enjoy every moment of his peace. This story of Arthur and Brenda serves as a powerful reminder that the true value of a marriage is not found in bank accounts or inheritances, but in loyalty, respect, and shared history. It teaches us that greed is a blinding force that can make us throw away a lifetime of stability for a fleeting moment of excitement. Brenda thought that money would buy her a new life, but instead, it cost her everything that truly mattered. It also reminds us never to underestimate the quiet people in our lives, for wisdom and strength are often found in silence, not in noise. Dignity, integrity, and patience will always triumph over arrogance and deceit in the end. Thank you so much for listening to this story with us today. If you enjoyed following Arthur on his journey for justice, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends and family so we can continue to bring you more compelling stories every single day. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. How did you feel about Arthur's final decision? Do you think he was right to block Brenda, or should he have given her a second chance? Have you ever witnessed a situation where money changed a person so completely? Please share your experiences and feelings from the bottom of your heart, as we cherish every single comment from our community. We wish you all excellent health, a life filled with joy, and peace in your hearts every single day. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.